Hey guys, Ellie here. Today it is about, I don't know, 1 or 2 o'clock, Saturday afternoon. It is very, very hot out here, so all the littles are cooling off in the shade, as am I. I'm sitting here just hanging out with them. And right now, I wanted to make a really quick video just sharing a very special story that I read a few days ago. This story really touched me. I feel like the meaning and the symbolism behind the story was very deep, and it's just a very powerful message that I feel is reflected in everyday life. I bet after you guys hear the story, a lot of you will be able to give examples of how you've seen this or how you can relate to it in some way, shape, or form. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into this story. This right here is pretty cool, guys. The Golden Girls have been a lot more friendly lately than they used to be. This is Rosie, as y'all can tell. No, but usually the Golden Girls they used to not want anything to do with people, but right now she's actually getting pretty close to me, and if I stay still long enough, she might let me pet her a little bit. She's been letting people pet her more the last few days. All 3 of them have, actually, so they're starting to come out of their shell a little bit. I feel like a lot of animals are coming out of their shell lately, which is pretty cool. But anyways, let's go ahead and get into this story. All right, guys, so our story takes place in about 470 BC. Now, there was a king. His name was King Ahasuerus, or better known as King Xerxes. I'll call him King Xerxes for this video. Now, this guy, he ruled over 127 provinces ranging from Ethiopia all the way to India. I don't know if you guys know where those 2 places are, but India is in Central Asia-ish, and Ethiopia is in Africa. That is a humongous chunk of land that he had control over. He was a very, very powerful king, more than we could probably fathom. Anyways, like I said, this was in about 470 BC, so it is a true story. Around this time, the king decided to throw a feast. This wasn't your ordinary one-night feast with a little bit of wine, with some turkey, or whatever they ate during this time. This was a massive 7-day feast for his nobles and his servants, all the people present in Susa, the citadel where he was during that time. And they feasted, they laughed, they rejoiced, they feasted for 7 days straight, a whole week. On the final day of the feast, the king decided to summon his queen, Queen Vashti, in order to show her off to all the people present, to just show off her beauty and to show everybody what he's got. And Queen Vashti, whenever the chamberlain approached her and told her the king ordered her to come to him at once, she refused. This was a shock to the king, to his nobles. This was a shock to everybody who heard. And furthermore, it infuriated them. And it even made them panic. It made them think to themselves, if Queen Vashti, if people get word of how she didn't obey the king, how much more will wives everywhere be disobedient to their husbands? How much more will the women all over Persia refuse to listen to the men all over the 127 provinces? And so the king and his nobles, they got together and they made a plan in order to keep this from happening. Their plan was to let it be known what the queen had done, and that she would at once be vacated of her title as queen, that she would be banished from the palace, and most of all, she would be replaced. The king would find himself a new queen that would be obedient to him. And so it was. The decree was made, and what better way for the king to find himself a new queen than to have all the virgins over the land he controlled come to him, almost like a beauty pageant, and let him decide who he wanted his new queen to be. And that's the way that it was. That exact thing is what happened. Every young woman who was eligible during that time came before the king, and there was one who stood out above the rest. This girl was named Esther. Esther was a Jew, and during this time the Jews were the lowest social class because they had been exiled and they were under the control of Persia. And if it had been known that Esther was a Jew, she probably wouldn't have been able to even be there and have the chance of becoming the queen. But because from a young age, her uncle, who took care of her, named Mordecai, told her to always keep that a secret, nobody ever knew. And so it was. The king loved Esther, and he made her his new queen. However, shortly after Esther became queen, disaster was barely averted. One day Mordecai, the uncle who raised her, was sitting outside the king's gate when he heard two men plotting to overthrow the king. They were planning the king's assassination. So Mordecai immediately rushed to Esther and told her what he had heard. Esther further relayed this message to the king, and they handled the matter accordingly. The two men who were plotting the assassination were hanged, executed, and all was fine and dandy. Mordecai, however, was never rewarded or never praised for what he did, saving the king's life, nor did he demand or ask for it. Mordecai did this because it was the right thing to do. However, conflict began to arise shortly after, whenever a new man rose to power. This man's name was Haman. Haman became the king's second in line. He may have even had more authority than the queen. Now Haman was a very selfish and arrogant man. He was not humble whatsoever. Whenever he would walk through the streets, he would demand that everybody who saw bowed down and worship him as if he was God or something. And most people did because they were afraid of his authority and they were afraid for their lives. But there was one man who refused to bow down to him no matter what, and that man was Mordecai, the Jew who raised Esther. The reason he refused to bow down is because there's only one person that he bowed down to and one person he worshipped. Only one person that was deserving of that, and that was God for Mordecai. This infuriated Haman, so much so that whenever Haman found out he was a Jew, he decided that he was going to not only execute Mordecai, but Haman decreed with his authority that he would put an execution order out on every single Jew in all of Persia, amongst all of the 127 provinces. It was a complete and utter extermination and genocide that Haman had planned. It was one of the most evil things that one could fathom. Whenever Mordecai got word of this, he rushed to Esther and told her what he had heard and what was going to happen if something wasn't done about it. He urged Esther to go to the king and plead with all of her heart on behalf of her people to keep them from being executed and for the decree to be taken down. Esther was afraid, though, because by law she could be executed or put to death if she were to approach the king without being summoned. So she held back on doing that for a little bit. She prayed on it, she fasted, and after a few days of this, she found it right in her heart to approach the king, even if it meant she should perish. So she did exactly that. She approached the king, and the king loved her. So the king heard every single word she had to say. And he said, "By all means, Esther, whatever you want, it'll be yours. Up to half my kingdom, if that's what you like." And Esther made a very simple request. It's kind of peculiar to me, but in the end it made sense. Esther said, "I request that you and Haman come to a feast that I prepare tomorrow night." The king and Haman were delighted. They said, "By all means, we will certainly be there." And so it was. They had the feast, they enjoyed themselves, they had a good time. At the end of the feast, the king asked Esther, "My queen, what is it that you wish?" Again, "Up to half my kingdom, if that's what you'd like." And Esther, her request was the same exact thing. She said, "Come to a feast, you and Haman, that I will prepare tomorrow night, and it'll be then that I tell you what I want, what my request is." Now that night, the king couldn't sleep. So he ordered for the book of records to be brought to him and read to him by a servant. Eventually, they got to the part where it was written how Mordecai had saved the king's life. The king had never heard who it was that saved his life truly until this moment. So he said to his servant, "What have we done to honor this man?" "Nothing, your majesty," replied the servant. The king knew he had to honor this man at once for what he had done for him. So he summoned Haman to his chamber and asked Haman what he would do if he wanted to honor somebody in the most prestigious way possible. Haman, thinking the king was talking about Haman himself, said, "O king, I would give them your horse, your crown, the most magical robe you can find, and I would let them walk through the streets and let everybody worship them." And the king said, "Excellent. Let's do exactly what you have said for Mordecai. In fact, you can be the one to lead the horse." This infuriated Haman so badly, as you may have guessed, that he didn't even want to show up for the feast the following night the queen had prepared. At the feast, the king asked his queen once again, "My queen, what is it that you request?" "Again, up to half my kingdom if that's what you'd like." Queen Esther replied to the king plainly and said, "My king, if it please you, I request for the decree that all the Jews throughout Persia be executed, be taken down, for I also am a Jew." The king replied, he was horrified at what he had heard, and said, "How dare somebody? Who would dare do such a thing to my beloved queen?" Esther replied, "Haman." Esther even added that Mordecai, the man who once saved the king's life, was also a Jew, and under Haman's decree would also be one of the people who would be executed. The king was so infuriated that he ordered Haman to be executed at once. And so it was. Haman got hanged, Mordecai got elevated to Haman's position, and Esther and Mordecai happily lived the rest of their days serving the king, but more importantly, and most importantly of all, serving God. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. You know, that story hit me really hard the first time I read it, because it's something that I guess I've always felt pretty passionate about. And it reminds me of my favorite quote from Walter Payton, where he said, you know, if you're good at something, you tell people, but if you're great, people will tell you. And so that always reminds me to stay humble and to just, in the end, everybody will be rewarded and compensated accordingly for their righteousness and for the good that they give in this world. And so it can be easy to try to praise yourself if you don't feel you're getting the praise you deserve. I've been there before, but I guess just remembering that God is a God of justice, and even if like it doesn't feel like justice has been served yet, it isn't ours to serve, it's God's to serve. And so we just got to be faithful and stay true to the righteous path. That's the best thing we can do for ourselves, and the best way we can set an example. My dad's waving at me. The best way we can set an example for others. You know, it kind of reminds me of a time that I was in middle school and high school. I remember in 7th grade, I was a pretty good basketball player. It was the end of the 7th grade basketball season, but we were training, getting ready for the 8th grade season. And I'm not gonna lie, I was getting really good at basketball during this time. And so I started to get a little bit cocky. I started to kind of tell my friends about how next year I'm gonna be starting on the A team and how I'm gonna average 16 points a game and whatnot. I was getting pretty arrogant. My parents might remember this phase of my life actually. And so 8th grade season came, and I did elevate to starting on A team like I predicted, and things were going pretty good, but eventually it started getting to my head more and more, and I kind of lost myself, I suppose, during that time. And so next thing you know, I started playing worse in 8th grade. In 9th grade, I got injured during football season, which comes before basketball, so I wasn't able to play in basketball. And then in 10th grade, whenever I did play basketball, I didn't make like the A team, I made the B team, and I was a bench player. And then eventually my basketball career kind of dwindled out. It kind of dwindled out from that point. The fire kind of stopped burning. Furthermore, I remember that I was kind of an above average height kid in middle school, but then around 9th or 10th grade, I peaked, I stopped growing. I remained at the 5'8" height that I am right now from that point, and it's been that way ever since. I can think of another kid who in 7th and 8th grade was on the B team. He may have been a starter, but he wasn't really, he wasn't one of the better players in middle school. His name was Matt, and he was really, really small whenever he was in middle school, but he was humble, he was patient, and he was a very, very hard worker. Come high school, my basketball career is starting to plummet, but Matthew's basketball career is starting to peak. He eventually made the A team. He had a huge growth spurt. His parents are shorter than mine, so it's something that genetically you wouldn't think would happen, but he ended up growing to be 6 feet in his adult height. By senior year, I'm an afterthought, and Matthew is like starting on varsity, dunking and stuff like that. And so that's just, that right there is a prime example of how he who praises himself will be humbled, and then he who humbles himself will be praised. I'm not saying that because I got cocky and praised myself that made me instantly stop growing and that made my basketball career plummet. But in perspective, whenever you look back on it, I was somebody that praised myself, and I was definitely humbled. And Matthew, from the time that he was young in middle school, he was somebody that always humbled himself and worked hard. And then eventually later on, he was praised. He was a great basketball player. So hats off to that guy. He taught me a very valuable lesson just from leading by example. And so if that principle applies to a bunch of middle school and high school kids that aren't fully mature, how much more do you think it will apply to people like us that are adults and that are mature and that do know better? So I guess the biggest takeaway that I could give, the biggest takeaway for me is, like the wisest man possible said, he who praises himself will be humbled, and then the one who humbles himself will be praised. And so I hope y'all remember that. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to this too. But you know, this video is about what, 15 minutes longish or something like that. So I should probably wrap it up. But I love you guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Be sure to let me know in the comments what kind of stuff you want to see. Hope you have a great day. And as I always say, your boy Ellie out.